Hey Rugged, when did your something's not right here gut feeling ever save you? Wife called me while I was at work. Just to say she was home from her night shift and planning to go to bed. She had worked night shift for years and never called me just to say she was home and going to bed before. She also sounded weirdly detached on the call. I asked her if she was okay. She said yes, just really sleepy. I got a weird feeling and told her I was going to leave work and come home. She told me I didn't need to. I said okay. And then I left work and rushed home anyway. Found a suicide note taped to the garage door. I got to her in time. Rushed her to the ER. And got her the help she needed. A week of inpatient psych. Followed by changes to medications and doctors. This was about 5 months ago. And she is so much better now. I used to just drive around country roads when I would feel stressed out or sad as a way to just get away and listen to music. One evening I was driving with my best friend in the car and we're on a gravel road that has a huge hill. We were driving towards the sunset but it was winter and the light was fading fast. As the car started down the hill I had this moment where I thought to myself my brights should be on and I flicked them on and at the bottom of this super steep hill stood 6 deer on the road. I slammed on the brakes and the car turned sideways and skidded to a stop like 4 feet from the deer. Those stupid deer didn't even move. They just stared into the passenger side of my car and my best friend pointed at them and said hey. Deer. The car was fine. We were fine. And Bambi was all good. I don't drive around like that anymore. My mom and her entire family were saved from dying from carbon monoxide poisoning by her dad. He left for work. Got a weird feeling and drove back home. Everyone in the house was unconscious. And he had to drag or carry them all outside one by one. They all survived. My sister since she was about 5 was always obsessed with tsunamis and would always ask my dad every night before she went to sleep if there would be a tsunami that night. We lived on a beach. About 5 years later when our family was holidaying in Samoa an earthquake struck at about 6 AM. It was only a dull low rumble but went on for over a minute. Everyone at the resort woke up and went outside for a few minutes then went back to bed. My sister having been obsessed with tsunamis ran down to look at the water and noticed the sea going out and saved a lot of lives including my own. There was about a minute from her noticing till that tsunami hit. Luckily for us there was a cliff right behind the resort, if not a lot more people would have been killed. Not me but my science teacher. When she was a teenager she was standing near some lights at a pedestrian crossing with her and her friend. Very chill but out of nowhere she had this gut feeling that both of them had to move. They moved just a couple meters away and the next moment a car had hit another car and had hit one of the street electricity utility poles and it had fell and exploded. Minor explosion enough distance away that it didn't hurt the girls, exactly where they were. One of the wires had also snapped and hit it exactly where they were standing as well. They basically were in a scene of car wreckage and snapped wires and electricity explosions and the pole collapse. Just real insane. If the pole had missed them, the wire would have hit them and if not that then most likely the cars. That gut feeling of moving away saved both of them. I remember this story so clearly from high school science class because it was such a WTF. I was learning violin when I was about 10 from an instructor at my local music shop. I got the weirdest feeling from him even though he didn't do anything out of the ordinary. I wanted to vomit every time I looked at him. Especially his hands. After 4 lessons I told my parents that I had a terrible feeling about him and I never wanted to go back. Luckily, they listened and didn't make me ever go to him again. A few years later he was arrested for molesting multiple of his students. I have no idea how I knew something was off. He never did or said anything but I just felt it. I woke up from a deep sleep at like 2 AM during a winter storm. Something wasn't right. I immediately went looking for my senior dog and couldn't find her anywhere in the house. My roommates had a tendency to let her out for a walk and forget about her. Closing the door, I ran to the front of the house and found her laying on the welcome mat. She was hardly breathing and covered in snow. She had been outside alone for at the very least 5 hours. I moved out shortly after. Was sitting on one of those metal cylindrical electricity boxes outside my house when there was a blackout. Electricity was slightly flickering in my house. No other houses had a blackout. I looked down at what I was sitting on and I was like, maybe this is the source of the problem. I stood up and stepped away from it, and like 2 seconds later it f***ing blew up. Like a pillar of flame shot out and above it for almost a full minute. It was basically a gigantic Bunsen burner and I was a few seconds short of physically getting fried. I was walking out of a grocery store when I saw this kid about to cross the road. Something came over me and I yanked him back onto the sidewalk. Not even a second later a truck came flying past. He was probably around 7 or 8ish. There's a very fun road that gets you from Nida and off to Vach, or back, in Germany. You can go 60 or 70 clicks kph along smooth tight turns and little rolling hills. All around it 4 acres and acres are fields of whatever's in season and no intersections for several kilometers. It's a very fun road to go too fast on. This day, something like wheat was in and it was high. I couldn't see around the corners. But I knew the road well and was staying in my lane. And I was going fast. And smiling. About halfway in, I heard a voice in my head as clear as if the speaker was sitting next to me and it said, "You need to slow down." It was startling and I braked immediately. 2 seconds later I come through one of the turns and into the ass end of a combine, taking up both lanes and moving slowly. I barely stopped in time. Those extra 2 seconds of brake time saved Volvo at least. But I'm pretty sure they saved my life too. Edit. I went out with my best friend on New Year's last year and were having drinks with her friends when I realized I was out of cigarettes. I left for a few minutes to walk over and grab a pack and ended up talking to a homeless guy for a while. And when I went over to the entrance of the bar she was outside and said something mean to me for no reason and walked off. I was confused, so I decided it would be good if I took a walk to let her cool off and then figure out what she was upset about. I was going to walk down the street for a bit but something told me to turn left. Walking behind the bar and then turning to the side of the bar when I see a girl laying down on the sidewalk and people walking by her. As I'm walking over to help I realize it's my friend and she's not very conscious. She was probably drugged while I was getting smokes and who knows what would have happened if I hadn't decided to go that way. Scares the shit out of me. I was walking to the barber shop. And for some reason, everything just felt off. I ignored the feeling but every step I took just made me feel like something wasn't right. So I decided to just go grab some food and come back. While I was eating I saw police cars and ambulances driving to around where I was before. It turns out there was a murder. Now I always listen to my gut feeling. It didn't save me but I saved someone else. When I was 6 my brother, 8 at the time, and I would go to my grandma's house while our mom worked late some nights. Anyway, one day I was just randomly thinking about fire alarms. I don't know what caused me to think about it but after I started I couldn't stop. I have ADHD and this super focus thing, so whenever I'm thinking about something as simple as fire alarms it consumes my mind. I asked my grandma and she said she hadn't tested hers in a while. Just for kicks she did and sure enough the batteries were dead. She replaced the batteries and made sure they worked. The very next morning her house caught on fire while she was asleep. If she didn't hear the fire alarm she would have been trapped in her room on the 2nd story without a phone or any way to contact help. She most likely would have died. I always make sure fire detectors alarms work in my house now. Edit. Forgot one. About 10 years ago. Working security at a site about 50 miles from home. Got off shift at midnight. And didn't bother to change out of uniform because I was only going to stop for gas. 2 stations in the town I was working in were open after midnight. But it slipped my mind as I drove past the first one. Pulled into the other. Same brand. Same gas price. Same sort of dump entirely, and just didn't like something about it. Nobody else around but he Clark that I could see. But I decided to go back to the other one. Topped off and headed back out of town. I get close to that station again. 3 city cop cars. Two deputies and a state trooper are outside blocking the road with guns drawn. Turns out a city cop walked in on a robbery. Dude put a bullet in his vest. And the store owner knocked the robber out cold with a bat before the cop could recover enough to get his gun out. That would have been me. In a uniform with a nice shiny badge. But no body armor. I'm afraid of roller coasters. Mostly heights, but they go hand in hand. My friends and I went to a theme park and went on one that was in darkness and went underground. I rode it once. Sitting in the back. And really enjoyed it surprisingly. When we reached the start again, there was no line, as it was the end of the day, so they asked if we wanted a final go before they shut down. Something in my gut told me not to go on, so despite my friends nagging, I didn't and waited with the bags. My friends came back around a few minutes later white as a sheet. About 3/4 of the way through the ride. There's a big drop, then it goes fast, and just before that, my friend in the back's bar had risen up. Apparently they had to grip onto her for the rest of the ride whilst trying to push the bar back down. I matched with a guy on Tinder. We exchanged messages. And everything was fine. Normal. We decided we would meet up for coffee in a week. A few days after we arranged a coffee date, he messaged me saying his father had passed away in those few days. He couldn't meet me in public. He could only meet me in private at his apartment. I trusted my gut. Sent my condolences. But said I couldn't meet him somewhere private. He tried to tell me I could trust him because he had a dog. I still declined. He got really aggressive and started messaging me horrible things. He called me every name in the book. I ended up blocking him. I tried to find him later on. And he basically never existed. He could have blocked me on all social media. But I couldn't find a trace of him anywhere. I don't know what the outcome would have been. But I just couldn't do it. In 2004. On Boxing Day. Not me but my mother. Family trip including all cousins and extended family on my dad's side to visit the coastal south of Sri Lanka on vacation. About 20 people in all. Well planned trip. Last moment my mother didn't want to go. No reason at all. None of us could get her to explain why, but she refused to go. So we went inland on a different trip to see some other relatives. Around midday, the entire extended family now on both sides were sitting shocked in front of the television watching the very same hotel we booked being washed away live by that tsunami. To date, she still can't explain what she felt. I was building a fort in the woods near my house as a kid. Got this eerie feeling that something was wrong, so I packed my stuff and made my way home. Next day, on my way to school on the bus, my friend mentioned a cougar his family saw running across the road that was within a couple hundred feet of where I was. Just so happened to be at the same time I was out there. I smelled burning plastic early in the morning at my family cottage and almost went back to sleep. I was around 15. But got up to investigate. A socket on the outside of the building had caught fire and flames were shooting up the wall. The rest of my family was still sleeping and there wasn't enough smoke for the alarms to go off. I ran and got the fire extinguisher. Got my dad up. And put it in his hands and pointed him towards the fire. Stopped it and called the fire department. I was president of a club. And a guy who'd recently joined just set off my alarm bells. But he never did anything wrong. I still couldn't shake the feeling he was off. I asked my best friend, a pretty burly guy, to just keep an eye on him during a conference we went to. Most of the club, minus me, went to a party at the conference. My best friend kept an eye on the weird guy for most of the night. And ended up stopping him from marping a passed out drunk girl. I pretty much always trust my gut feelings now. Edit. It was a model UN. I'm a girl. When my husband and I were in college, we came home late one night after a long day and had to get up early the next day. We were both so tired and he wanted to leave his backpack and computer in the car because we were going to be getting up and back into the car in a few hours. My gut feeling said absolutely not, and I made him take his bag and computer. When we came back down the next morning, his car had been broken into. We were looking at houses a while back and found one that was great location. Would have been perfect size for us and didn't appear to need any work other than new carpet and stuff I wanted to do, like painting and switching it over from oil burning furnace. I just had a nagging feeling about it, and my husband agreed. As much as we loved it, something was off with it. I actually thought ghost or something silly like that, and we ended up passing on it. I was still kicking myself about it until a few months later when it had a major electrical fire. The whole house and everything in it was a total loss, and the family that lived there barely got out alive. I don't know if it saved me, but years ago my so at the time had a co-worker that kept inviting us out to drink. I had never met the guy and was wondering why he seemed so eager to meet me, especially since I wasn't even old enough to drink at the time. He eventually told my ex that we should come over to his place for drinks in order for me to partake. I remember around this time creeping his FB and seeing the squirrely guy posing in front of his Honda. Something about it all made me laugh and wonder, why does this 20-something-year-old want to go to such lengths to hang out with a 17-year-old girl he knows is taken? A couple years later he is arrested on a multitude of child pornography and assault charges. They seized several devices that proved he'd been doing shit with children and animals since he was at least 13. Cherry on top? Not me, but my mom's best friend. July 2000. My mom's best friend Michelle and her husband were out of town. Michelle has this overwhelming feeling of panic and that something was wrong and my mom needed her. Neither of them had cell phones. Michelle felt so uneasy that she made her husband drive them back home. My dad had committed suicide at our home that morning. My mom dropped my 3-year-old brother off at daycare before she had to work in the morning. When she got to work she had this terrible feeling something was wrong with him. She ended up leaving work and drove to the daycare. She found the daycare lady inside sleeping while the daycare kids, including my brother, were running around the pool. My brother never went back to that daycare again. WTF kind of daycare would even have a pool? Those things murder the shit out of little kids. I was driving and it started to snow. I noticed that I was going a bit fast and strongly sensed I should slow down. I did, and a couple seconds later I came up around a bend with the road suddenly being covered in ice. I started to fishtail while sliding directly towards two people standing outside their car. They had wrecked in the same manner that I was about to do and were standing outside their car, with me heading straight for them. I quickly thought of my options and ended up doing a hard right straight into the highway barrier. I slid nearly 100+ feet, dragging the front of my car to slow it down. Because I had decided to slow down, I was able to give the two guys enough time to get out of the way before I slammed into their cars. Even though I totaled my car, which was sad, I did not end up killing two people that night. The police did not end up ticketing anyone thankfully, and they finally sanded the road after we had all wrecked. Lol. Snow while driving still scares me to this day. Few years back I went to uni in Brussels. I would always take the train to get there. One morning I just woke up and didn't feel great at all. Keep in mind I have had a horrible flare-up of Crohn's for the last weeks, but this felt different. Guess it was my gut. So instead of pushing through it like I did with Crohn's, I decided to stay home for once. This was the only day out of 2 that I ever stayed home from uni. That day the terror attack happened on the train that I usually ride to get to uni.